Hey guys, it's Mitch. How's it going? We did part one of the Love and Death storyline in Swamp Thing a little while back. I figured, why not do part two as well? We're doing Saga of the Swamp Thing number 30. So this is probably Alan Moore's breakthrough comic, at least, in North America, and is arguably the storyline that started up DC's Vertigo line of comics. The reason being, which I missed in the last video, was that issue number 29, which we did go over, one thing I didn't notice on the cover is that it doesn't have the Comics Code Authority stamp. And that might not be particularly shocking after, seeing the content of that particular issue, that the Comics Code might have a little bit of a problem with it. So they were getting close to deadline. Karen Berger, who was the editor, kind of had a decision to make whether they were going to delay the issue or, maybe cut some content to try and kowtow to the Comics Code Authority. And what she decided to do was just send it out without a Comics Code Authority stamp, which wasn't something that was usually done. And potentially could have cost her job. But it went through, it sold fine. Next issue, the stamp is back. But this is going to be the last issue of Swamp Thing that would have the Comics Code Authority stamp. After this, they weren't going to bother submitting it anymore. If taking the stamp off of the comics didn't affect sales, and it did mean that they could do more interesting subject matter sometimes, why wouldn't you do that? So what's been going on in this comic so far? I gave you a whole bunch of lead up in the last one, so if you want to know all of the backstory, maybe you want to go back and check out that. But what's been going on right now is that Abigail, Cable's Uncle Arcane, who's an evil scientist guy, seems to have come back from the dead and taken over her husband, Matt Cable's body. And he's brought all sorts of just kind of nasty spirits up from hell with him. It's the kind of storyline that you could theoretically dispose of within, 2 or 3 issues. And it's like, oh man, remember that time that crazy old Uncle Anton possessed Matt? Yep, that certainly was crazy times, honey. But Alan Moore at this time is kind of young still. He's trying to break into the business. He's trying to make a name for himself. And he's going to do it with some memorable storylines. So this one got particularly disturbing in the last issue. And it's just going to get kind of more so in this one. So let's get right into it. We can start with the cover. That's a pretty good cover. The artists on this, on the cover anyway, are Steve Bissette and John Totleben. And I love the job they do on this series. We've just got, Swamp Thing and Abigail being beset by what, I think we're going to find out are essentially corpse hands. And it's the kind of cover that could be kind of generic, theoretically, but in context, it has a bit more meaning. Got a lot of that pen nib hatching instead of like solid blacks that Totleben likes to do. A whole bunch of black in Swamp Thing himself, though. I do love the way that, the treatment they came up with for, Swamp Thing textures. He always looks good in this. All right, so at the end of the last issue, Anton Arcane, who we'll just refer to as Arcane from now on, had kind of reacquired Abby and brought her back to the big mansion that he had originally presented as the new house they were going to be living in back when he hadn't let on yet that he wasn't Matt. So what's happening now is Arcane is growing in power, and just more and more evil is happening kind of as a result of this. So waves of dark energy kind of ripple out from the house that they're staying in. And we're going to get little snippets of things going on in different parts of Louisiana. So we're going to get, some teenagers who are going to get their kicks by setting a homeless person on fire. We're going to get a beleaguered housewife who's finally had enough of her unappreciative husband and brandishes a frying pan. We're going to get a bit more disturbing from there. Oh yeah, I forgot. Steve Bissette hates regular page layouts. In Shreveport, a cat checks in on somebody's newborn baby, decides that might be a fun place to sleep. In Lake Charles, a guide dog turns on its owner. And on a farm 3 miles west of Crowley, something terrible is born that cries like a woman and then dies. So there's just bad shit happening everywhere now, more so than usual. And in Huma, Abigail Cable just can't stop screaming. So, that's a hell of an opening double-page spread. This design here is absolutely wild. Every part of it here, from the fanned-out sort of lesser panels here, just showing snippets. We've got the focus on Abigail's screaming face, of course. Everything's kind of pointing towards it here, in case you missed it. And then focusing in on Arcane's eyes and mouth, which are creepy as fuck. And in the background, you've got this, this emanating power source, which, it's kind of abstracted. It looks pretty good. The artwork in this is actually, Steve Bissette is still doing the pencils, but John Totleben's taken this one off. So he's getting help from Alfredo Alcala on this one. So that's a name I don't mind seeing on fill-ins. Like crazy looking splash page here. That is absolutely wild. Ton of black on the page. I would assume probably referenced, for the face itself, but like, man, that is striking. And it's like, this is the comic that got the Comics Code Authority, huh? But from what I understand, the Comics Code Authority, they didn't really take into account context. Like they wouldn't think about whether or not something was disturbing. They would just look for images that broke the comics code. If there isn't an image that specifically shows, like a wound happening or somebody like doing drugs or something, or, whatever is specifically in the code, then it doesn't matter what's actually happening in the panel, it can go through. So just showing how useless of an organization that was. Makes you think back to that Amazing Spider-Man storyline with Harry jonesing for drugs, and, they wouldn't approve that shit. And Stanley's like, what? It's an anti-drug comic. It's like, doesn't matter. Can't show drugs. Drugs are bad. Absolutely ridiculous. So, okay, Abby's getting held down by Arcane's acquaintances. So in this case, these are just like some of the darkest souls in hell. They're mostly like mass murderers. And Arcane is going to start off by giving us his backstory, which, is important because the whole thing with Arcane kind of sneaking back into Abigail's life, it hasn't been expressly set up until this point. It's been hinted at a lot. This is one of the earliest examples of Alan Moore using foreshadowing in a long-form comic story. Again, at least as far as North American audiences were concerned. And it wasn't something you usually saw. Maybe every once in a while. But that's more along the lines of like Chris Claremont having somebody say something that didn't make any sense in context so that later on, when he was running out of story ideas, he could come back to it and then go, oh yeah, maybe I can spin that off into something. This was like much more direct. It had much more of an actual purpose. So first he's going to talk about his death, and this is going to be, I believe, his most recent death, because he's died a couple of times now. The original deal with Arcane was that he was trying to find a secret to eternal life, and he had come up with, I think it was the Unmen, who were all like robotic animal monstrosity kind of people. Arcane himself at that point had become like this cyborged up spider humanoid. So the first thing we're going to see is, Arcane just kind of exploding in every direction, as Steve Bissette can, do very well. And again, I'm like, this is the issue that the Comics Code Authority approved, huh? That's okay. I guess it's because it's like a monster being dispatched. I don't know. It doesn't make any kind of fucking sense. So, this is all pretty much what you would expect it to be, which is basically that Arcane went down to hell and he was dragged down by the sheer weight of like evil souls, like the sheer mass of evil people. It kind of coalesced into like this evil gravity that, inbound evil souls would find it nearly impossible to resist. But Arcane was like super evil. So he was able to escape the already interred souls of hell. And, first thing, of course, went back to his body, which was, it's a complete ruin at that point. It's just bones and like shrapnel. And this stuff here's pretty interesting. Like the storytelling in particular. Steve Bissette's kind of making an effort to, just have you follow him down into the shadowed lands. And, not giving himself a whole lot of room to put in these, like, very skinny vertical panels with, like, all sorts of just, dead souls in there and Arcane escaping. There's some great stuff going on here. So because of the state of the body that he had left behind, like, he couldn't present himself in that. So he had to go and find a different body. And Abigail jumps to, oh my God, you possessed Matt. Like, she immediately jumps to Arcane took over Matt's body. And it's like, well, no, it wasn't actually quite that simple. Turns out Matt had been kind of weird for a little while because, he got into his accident that somehow gave him, like, reality-altering powers. And Matt used that. Well, first of all, basically, it wouldn't work unless he was drunk. So, obviously, that's going to start things off the wrong way. And when he was able to use his power, he would use it to come up with basically different kinds of women, like just like impossible women. So they describe here like trout-skinned women with the luster of neon, women of smoke, mannequins textured like apricots. So just like, completely fantasy women. Like, let's just try out some weird shit. And in the meantime, Arcane just kind of watched all of this happen and bided his time. And Abigail naturally doesn't want to hear this, but Arcane's like, this is the truth, honey. You better listen up. And again, like, neat stuff going on. Refusing to use a panel grid. I love it. There isn't a single panel here that adheres to a 9-panel grid. So now we're going to hear about the things that Alan Moore has been building up. So earlier on, there was a run-in with a Ouija board that apparently Arcane kind of took over and probably didn't let them know that he was the one. I don't know. I didn't see that particular issue. But near the beginning of Alan Moore's run on the title, there was the issue where Swamp Thing had to fight the Monkey King, which is a weird issue. And at the same time, Abigail and Matt had a fight that night. Abigail had to run up to the facility that she worked at. That's where the Monkey King was attacking. And eventually, Matt tried to chase after her in the car, but naturally, he'd been drinking and ran off the road and, completely totaled the car and managed to injure himself fatally, eventually fatally. And then while he was sitting there upside down in the car, kind of lamenting his fate, this fly flew in and started talking to him and saying, yeah, you know what? You're in a tough spot, buddy. I don't think you're going to last too long. I could help you. I'm just going to need you to, open up and let me climb inside there. And Matt, argued a little bit, but eventually figured, okay, well, I'm dying anyway. So, swallowed Arcane, who never introduced himself as Arcane. But still, it's a willing handing over of the body, right? So now Arcane's back. He's got this brand new body. Not only the body, but he's got Matthew Cable's powers, which he can access a whole lot better than Cable ever could. And he starts off by having a whole bunch of, dead hands drag Abby down through the floor. And, great looking mood stuff here. We're getting some montage pieces. It's always nice. Gotta like how Arcane is pretty much always kind of heavily and dramatically lit. I think that seems to be a choice they're making here. Which I definitely approve of, as the guy who draws Popo. All right, so now we're going to just kind of hop around different parts of the bayou here and see some more snippets of everyday life as things get more and more evil. So we've got Hattie here, who's been looking after her disabled sister, who decides, you know what, I think I'm just about tired of this arrangement. We've got Cheryl and Lonnie Williams, who wait until their parents fall asleep before they decide to play with their new cat in the microwave. In Beaumont, all the tropical fish at the First Water Pet Shop begin to eat first each other and then themselves. In Springfield, there's a brief plague of ladybugs. And beneath the earth, there are muffled booming voices. And beneath the ocean, there are terrible lights. So this is like signs of the apocalypse starting to rain down because Arcane has come back. And then we're going to take a break to check in on other parts of the DC universe, which is a weird moment. I guess we have to occasionally, pay fealty to the DC superhero universe. I don't know that we really do, but again, this is early days of a comic like this. Swamp Thing has already, I think, crossed over probably from time to time into other comics, or other comics have crossed over into this one. I don't think it means you have to check in with the Monitor here, but that's what they decide to do. And they register that there's some pretty heavy duty shit going on in Louisiana, and it's, starting to turn into a pretty big problem. So, Monitor's assistant here, who I don't believe gets named, nope, doesn't look like it, is a little concerned, but the Monitor himself is just going to watch. So I'm not really familiar about the role of the Monitor. It seems an awful lot like the role of the Watcher. This is before Crisis on Infinite Earths, so that's interesting. From there, that's a weird segue. From there, we're going to cut to Arkham, which is at least a little bit more grounded. So we're going to start off here with the Floronic Man, who was an enemy of Swamp Thing in earlier issues. And Woodrue here is losing his goddamn mind. He's yelling about bugs coming out of the bayou, and he's been smacking his head off the door, which the attendants are kind of creeped out about, but not nearly as creeped out as they are by the fact that the Joker has stopped laughing. So, that's their big, holy shit moment. Just Joker staring off, having his 1,000-yard stare and drooling. Great looking page. Good looking Arkham Asylum here. There's a good amount of detail going on there. Back to Arcane, who's still, learning how to master his powers, but still, leaps and bounds ahead of where Matthew ever was. Sends his servants off into the night to just kind of go amuse themselves. These are all his serial killer servants, of course. And he's going to go out for a walk in the bayou in the freezing cold as it begins to snow. And then we're going to get a gigantic hero shot of Swamp Thing. Yeah, this is more like a poster than an actual page here, but it still works. It's a great looking shot. It seems a bit of a shame to put a fair amount of work into, there looks like there's a lot of rendering going on the trees here. Swamp Thing himself is mostly black, which is probably a good thing, but there's still like some decent, textures going on, like on the arm and the shoulders here, and then obscuring everything with white flecks. But yeah, no, it looks great. Can't argue against it. So Swamp Thing's walking through the woods, kind of, I think, wondering what the hell's going on with the snow when he gets alerted. And then a blast of power, probably evil power, comes out of nowhere and knocks him off his feet. That's a nice dynamic panel there. Nicely lit. And we get our great moment here where Swamp Thing's collecting himself for a moment. And we've got the body of Matthew Cable just levitating behind him, just radiating power. Looking at him, he's got like a halo of bugs. Swamp Thing at first is just kind of like, Matt? And Matt's like, nope, guess again, buddy. And we get the close-up as he realizes it's Arcane. And Arcane confirms it here in a great panel here. It's just like triumphant. And yeah, Arcane descends, says, I have returned, and the energies that churn within me are as limitless as my very great need for revenge. Swamp Thing's like, if you need revenge so bad, why are we talking? And Arcane, does his best Bond villain and says, hey, why kill you when I can make you suffer? I think I'm going to get you to dance a little bit on your strings there before I finish you off. Swamp Thing at first refuses, says, I'm not dancing for you. Do what you want. I don't give a shit. And then Arcane says, I got Abigail. And Swamp Thing has to respond to that, so he just follows Arcane off into the snow. This whole sequence is fantastic. Like, everything in here is just amazing. I think the surprising thing, if anything, is that this storyline is so short. Again, I think it's down to this being pretty early in Alan Moore's North American career. And, still being fairly new on this comic in particular. So, a 4-issue story is still, it's a pretty good length, but, you think about the kind of stories that Alan Moore would usually set up, where, even something like, we're looking at Wildcats recently, and, how long is the Gang War story? That goes on for, 10 issues, I think. And, yeah, just, with how important I think the story is. This is maybe the most important Swamp Thing story. I don't know, I guess it's just surprising that it doesn't go on, it doesn't get milked, which is something you would expect from Alan Moore. So we're going to check in with Arcane's buddies who have, gone out into the world and are just mingling with everyday society. So, just hanging out in a bar or at a bus stop or at a playground. And, just the fact that they're there and out in the world is creepy. And meanwhile, everything bad within 200 miles finds itself heading for Louisiana without knowing why. Great shot of stuff just kind of stumping off into the distance. And Arcane himself flies home to prepare for, Swamp Thing, but also to prepare because he knows that he's going to have a whole bunch of visitors soon. And again, we get the shot of Swamp Thing here. He's just resigned. Just okay, what are the hurdles I've got to go through to get rid of you this time, Arcane? And it's you got no idea, buddy. And we get a silent 2 pages here, apart from just a couple of sound effects, really just 2 or 3, to just kind of drive home how quiet it is. As Swamp Thing enters the house, getting some Dutch angles here. That's interesting. Setting the panels themselves on an angle. Just anything to avoid a 9-panel grid, eh? And the place is completely deserted, goes upstairs, goes into the bedroom, and finds Abigail in bed. Doesn't move when he approaches. And we get a long, extended silence, I guess, while, we're waiting outside, and Swamp Thing emerges carrying Abigail. And comes out, Arcane's waiting for him, and asks the big ending sting, how long has she been dead? Which Arcane finds hilarious, which is kind of shocking, really, after the last couple of pages. We've just had a long, almost silent creep through this, creepy haunted house-looking thing. We got Swamp Thing probably looking around every corner, waiting for whatever attack he's anticipating from Arcane. And once he finally does see Abby, we get that protracted silence while we're just waiting to hear exactly what kind of atrocity he's done. And once we actually hear it, the first thing we've heard in pages is Arcane cackling at the top of his lungs. And, they're going to fill up the panel here with the lettering of it. It's obscene. It's great. And, this would be a huge deal at this time. We're on issue 30. Abigail herself has, she's been a character in DC for quite some time at this point, maybe 10 years. chances are, if you're reading Swamp Thing at this point, you know, like you're probably pretty invested in the character. Alan Moore's been writing it long enough, and I think it's been getting enough plaudits that it's probably starting to attract new readers. But I think most of the people reading this thing, yeah, are, you know, they're used to the cast. And we've apparently killed off Matt, and now it looks like we've killed off Abigail. So the next one is going to be kind of the climax for this particular story, but then there's going to be an extended epilogue. So we'll do both of those. But anyway, yeah, that is going to do it for Swamp Thing number 30. So yeah, with it being such a short story, like you get a whole lot of impact in each comic, and yet it doesn't feel like anything's really rushed. We maybe don't get to sit and soak in the terror as long as we'd like to, or probably certainly not as much as Alan Moore would have liked to. But the pace to this still feels pretty good. And, you know, like it's actually moving along at a pretty decent clip. It's funny, actually, up to this point, Swamp Thing hasn't had a whole lot to do in this particular storyline. It's all pretty much been about Abigail and the just ongoing horror that it turns out is the end of her life. So yeah, next time we're going to wrap things up, but it might be a little bit bittersweet. I personally love this story. I think this was when I first started branching out and, you know, started getting a whole bunch of trades. This was one of the first ones because, you know, I'd heard about the great Alan Moore run on Swamp Thing. And I didn't know which one to pick up. So I think I just picked up one of the earliest trades, which happened to be Love and Death. And I think I picked that up like around the same time I picked up like one of the Sandman trades and the first Hellblazer, like the Jamie Delano Hellblazer trade. So, you know, like I had read some serious comics before, but like that's a lot of heavy duty shit all in one go. And this story in particular, yeah, that definitely left an impression on me to the point where like I'm just kind of stoked that I have these issues now. Like, you know, I don't have all the ones that were collected in that volume. I don't have the Pogo issue by Sean McManus, or the other one, well, also with Sean McManus, where he's burying Alec Holland's bones. I can live without those. I just wanted the main thrust of the storyline here, and we're going to go through every bit of it, so that'll be some good stuff. For this one, though, that's going to do it. Thanks very much for watching, guys. If you like this video, please hit the like button. Helps with all the algorithm stuff, you know. If you want to see more, hit subscribe. And if you really want to help out, in the description, there's a link to my Patreon. And if you go subscribe there, that gives you access to everything I do. So, whole bunch of videos, whole bunch of comic book art. In the description of this, there's also the link to the Blood Force merch store. Everyone wants to know where you can get the Blood Force merch. Everyone. I heard Taylor Swift just saying the other day how much she wanted a Blood Force hat, and she didn't know where to get them. Now you know where to get them. It's in the link in the description here. Somebody tell Taylor. So yeah, you can also follow me on Instagram and DM me there for commissions. Commissions are open. So yeah, that's going to do it, guys. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.